The Juneau World Affairs Council presents Vulnerable Vietnam, a photo story focused on climate change in the Mekong Delta, with Lione Clare. Clare is a photographer from Sitka with a professional interest in climate change and conservation. She was in Vietnam earlier this year documenting effects of climate change.
Good evening, and thank you very much for having me here. I want to thank the Juneau World Affairs Council for inviting me, and all of you for coming tonight, as well as K2OO for hosting and broadcasting. Here we go. Okay. So this past winter session, over the end of December and January, I studied abroad in the southern region of Vietnam. It was part of a study abroad program with my university in the Climate Change Studies minor department. And we traveled kind of all in that orange circle. We flew into Ho Chi Minh City and spent a few days there, and then gradually made our way down to the tip of Vietnam at Ca Mau National Park, and then toured a few other national parks and came back to Ho Chi Minh City. I have one more semester left at the University of Montana in Missoula. I'm studying resource conservation, climate change studies, and media arts. Yeah, okay, let's get in. So before I kind of start talking about the trip and my photo storytelling project, I would like to kind of introduce my photography experience. It all began in Sitka with James Polson at the Daily Sitka Sentinel. When I was 14 and 15, I kind of job shadowed him, and he gave me one of his old cameras and was like, leave it on manual, and this is kind of how it works, and good luck. So that was a really good way to learn photography. And then when I was 16, I decided I really wanted to focus on photography and spent some time at Maine Media Workshops in the summer. And I was recommended to go there by Tim Gray, who is a photographer, writer, and educator in New York City. And my mom knew someone who had taken one of his workshops and connected me with him, and he recommended I attend Maine Media Workshops. Later, I think that it was the next year, Tim recommended I apply for a North American Nature Photography Association, or NAMPA, high school scholarship. And he wrote me a letter of recommendation for that. And I got one of 10 that year. I think they do it biannually. Of all students selected out of North America, there was 10. I was one of them. We went to Jacksonville, Florida for a huge nature photography summit where James Balog was there to present Chasing Ice. Art Wolf got an amazing award, and there was all kinds of lightning talks and workshops. And we also, the 10 students and 9 students and I, got to be mentored by 4 professional photographers off the coast of Georgia on Cumberland Island before the summit. And then my freshman year of college, linking back to Tim Gray and NAMPA, I was invited on a photography safari for 2 weeks in Tanzania and was recommended to be that guest young photographer by the president of NAMPA at the time. There was a man who wasn't able to go on the safari and wanted to donate his spot to a young photographer. So I was chosen for that. A little bit about the study abroad program that I went on. It's called Winter Session in Vietnam. You earn 6 upper division credits towards the 21 credit climate change minor. Build a lot of cross-cultural connections. We studied a little bit at Can Tho University in Vietnam and met students there and got lectures from professors. And we had lessons and assignments in addition to climate change impacts, mitigation, and adaptation strategies, also in culture, economy, and history. And also it was just a immersive cultural experience as well. We had an opportunity to do a homestay for 3 nights, and that was fantastic. And then a bunch of hands-on field experiences I mentioned earlier. We went to a lot of national parks and just a lot of learning kind of in the classroom outside, which was really awesome. This is just a slide showing a little bit of Vietnam, and what we did here is the War Remnants Museum, which we visited our very first day in Vietnam. And that was a really kind of disheartening but really a good experience to learn about that history and kind of see both sides. We had a little bit of fun to hang out in the cities during the night. That's a few people from my group. This is a statue of Ho Chi Minh in Can Tho. And I probably ate the most spring rolls ever in my entire life. I always got spring rolls. They were really good with fresh shrimp. And then we had an opportunity to visit a floating market as well. So being in Vietnam and learning a ton of new information about climate change, impacts, adaptation, culture, economy, it was a lot of information, and I knew that I wanted to create a photo storytelling project before I participated in the program. But I didn't have much of like this is what I'm going to do, like an outline of what it was going to be, and it was kind of based on what we did experiences and what photographs I was able to get. It wasn't like just there for photography, so I had some challenges of like I had to be participating while I could take some photographs and not be like, oh, can you do this or whatever to set up the photo. So that was definitely a challenge, but once I came back to school in Montana, I asked myself the question, how am I going to be able to boil all this down and communicate what I learned visually in a meaningful way and understandable? One thing I really realized as I was going through my images is that humans and the relationship between humans and the environment and agriculture was going to be really important to include in my story. I grew up in Sitka, learned to appreciate nature at a young age, and was in love with the environment and really concerned about climate change impacts to the environment. And being in Vietnam really opened up my eyes to how it's affecting people as well. And so I knew that that needed to be a part of my story. And when I was sitting down with my faculty mentor who helped me develop this project, we decided that the 4 themes of food security, coastal forests, renewable energy, and migration would be a good way to kind of outline the story with photographs. My first theme is food security. The Mekong Delta is very flat with elevations less than 2 meters above sea level, so it's perfect for growing rice. However, saltwater intrusion due to sea level rise from climate change is a very big concern and is affecting rice production in the Delta. Rice is also an important staple food for Vietnam and a lot of Southeast Asia, and the rice grown in Vietnam is supplied to other Southeast Asian countries. This is just an example of one meal that we had, and I can't really think of many that didn't include rice. Last year was the worst drought in Vietnam in 90 years. So water shortages in combination with unpredictable water flows or decreased water flows from upriver dams on the Mekong from China, Cambodia, Laos are challenges, and the addition of saltwater intrusion just adds to that challenge of agricultural systems and especially rice, because you need water to grow rice and it needs to be a certain salinity. So Vietnam is acknowledging that there's these stresses on especially rice growing in the Delta, and are working to build the adaptive capacity of farming systems and make them more sustainable. Farmers are having to spend more money on irrigation and to keep salinity in check, and so the government is working on trying to develop ways that, to make that more sustainable and easier for the farmers. One way is kind of switching large-scale farming to a smaller scale, which in addition, the larger scale farms commonly are lower quality, high quantity crops, and so you're overturning the soil more often, and that's not allowing for storage of carbon in the soil and depletes the quality of the soil. And a lot of smaller scale systems are higher quality crops. They're taking longer to grow, so you're not overturning that soil and releasing the stored carbon as much. So that's a more sustainable way, and also is a way to mitigate some carbon CO2 release into the atmosphere. Another way is this integrated system where you have rice growing over here, and this kind of trench is where baby shrimp are grown. And once they're big enough, they use these nets to capture them and transfer them into a bigger pond. And this integrated system is becoming a lot more common in the Mekong Delta because it's more secure for farmers. You can have rice growing during the wet season and you're growing your shrimp, and you can have the shrimp to eat during the dry season because they're more salt tolerant than rice. But also in these systems, they're working to develop more salt tolerant rice. So they're adapting the rice to predict, to help with saltwater intrusion if there is and the salinity goes up in the system. They can still have rice to rely on for food. My second theme is coastal forests. Mangrove forests along the coast of Vietnam are a critical ecosystem. They sustain food security as well as ecological function. Let's see. Great technology. Okay.
Thanks, Windows.
There we go. I think that kind of works. Okay. Where was I? So mangrove forests they sustain food security and are important for ecological function. They're also great storm buffers and prevent erosion, which is increasingly important as tropical storms intensify with climate change. And they are really biodiverse forests, and that links back to food security and providing food sources for people. This is in Kangeo Biosphere Reserve, where we participated in a restoration effort. We planted about 40 young 2-year-old trees. And this area of the Delta, the reserve, has been doing this restoration effort since after the war. I think it was 20,000 hectares of the forest were destroyed because of chemicals that were sprayed during the war. And since then, they've been trying to regenerate the forest and understand that this is something that's necessary as climate change intensifies. This kind of shows the plot in the front. These are the trees that we planted, and in the back are trees 8 to 25-year-old. So hopefully in the next couple decades, the little trees that we planted will be as fully grown as the ones in the background, and it will be a more climax stage of the forest. And when these mangrove forests thrive, so do the communities. They provide food sources like fish and shrimp, which are pictured here drying, and also support a ton of other species to thrive. And it's really important for especially communities, people living deep in these forests where they just live off the land. This photo is an example of one of those farms. It's a shrimp and oyster farmer who we were fortunate to eat lunch with. And this photo shows these floating things here, and in the background are the oyster traps. So he'll go out in this boat and he'll check them. And he also has a system set up where when the tide comes in and the shrimp come in, then he drops a net as it's going out, and then he can catch the shrimp in there and he'll fish those. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be there at the right tide. It would have been cool because I think the way of his farming system could be a whole photo story in itself. But hopefully this photo captures it enough for the story that I have, and I think it does. Clearly, though, it's very critical that these forests are important to sustain, and there's tremendous value in the ecosystem services they provide, and this is increasingly important as climate change intensifies. My third theme is renewable energy. Start off with a little fact that the average American emits 19 metric tons of CO2 per year on average. And in contrast, the average Vietnamese only 2 metric tons of CO2 per year. So Vietnam has a really small impact, especially per capita, but they're still taking both small and big scale mitigation measures. This photo is of a biogas farming system that we were able to visit. And this portion of it, the pig dung is collected in this pen and washed away. And then there's what's called a biogas digester, which you'll see in a later photo, connected to these like suspended tanks which are full of methane. Pig waste and animal waste releases a lot of methane when it's decomposing or just sitting there, so they're taking advantage of that energy and they're using it as fuel. And also here, the river is right across the street, so they're eliminating just dirty pollution and pig waste washing into the river. This is the farmer also using vegetation. This, in like a huge area over here is a pond that he has growing, he's growing water lettuce, which also provides nutrients for fish that he grows in the pond. But breaking down vegetation also releases methane. So he's growing this water lettuce on his pond in order to take advantage of that breaking down as well and using the methane. This is just a little portion of the biogas digester. So he'll put it in there, wait a while, it'll digest, and then connect to his home, and he can use that as fuel as well. This is the farmer showing how their cooking stove works. So in addition to that, he also has a generator that can run off of methane at this point, and it satisfies his family's electricity needs and pumps water to irrigate his crops. These are some students in my group having conversation just next to a biogas digester that's in the ground on the farm. And that is a hose, one of many hoses that connects to the house to provide fuel to the cooking stove. We also had the opportunity to visit Vietnam's first wind farm, which is an offshore wind farm, and a lot bigger scale in terms of mitigation. It's the Bac Lieu offshore wind farm, and it offsets about 151,330 tons of CO2 per year. One fact about the farm in the previous photo, offsetting about 3 to 4 metric tons per year. So small scale and really pretty big scale. There's plans to expand what's now 62 wind turbines to, I think, a little over 100. So that will integrate even more renewable energy into Vietnam's national grid. My fourth theme is migration. This is Ho Chi Minh City at night. I was fortunate to get to spend 3 extra days after the program ended in Ho Chi Minh City, and one of our TAs and friends that we had met took me on his motorbike way out of the city across the river in order to get this shot, and luckily he had a tripod, and I was able to capture the shot of the city. But it's rapidly growing. It's a center for entrepreneurship, innovation, growing youth culture, business, and education opportunities, all of these in the industry and service sectors. And it's very attractive, especially to youth. Some people are from the Mekong Delta, and there's a lot of this is rural to urban migration. And that's expected, those population increase from the Mekong Delta is expected to increase as climate change keeps intensifying and adding stress and insecurities to those agricultural livelihoods. This photo just kind of shows how busy it is. I had to cross the street right in the middle like this man to get this photo. Kwa, who we were with, was like, "Do you want to cross the street without the zebra stripes?" And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, no crosswalk." And I was like, "I don't know." It's really scary at first, but the motorbikes are used to people crossing the street, and it's pretty slow-moving traffic, so your heart pounds a little bit, but it's not too bad. Another sign of rapid growth in Ho Chi Minh City is unfinished skyscrapers, and I would expect that these will stay unfinished because it's so rapidly growing, they can't keep up with the development of these skyscrapers and buildings. We had several opportunities to connect with youth while we were studying abroad. These few students are from what's called the Delta Youth Alliance. And it is a group they're working on environmental challenges and sustainability challenges. One project that a woman was working on is educating children who live on the river about pollution in the river and issues associated with that. This is on Sun Island, which is in the middle of the river in Kanta, which is kind of in the center of the delta. And here we kind of learned about ecotourism, and we all broke up into different groups, from some people from our group, some people from their group, and did little projects about what we learned. Theirs was focused on plant diversity. I think building these connections between youth at this point is really important. These relationships are really valuable. Like us, I noticed that they were concerned but also hopeful with regards to climate change. And this whole experience and project has made me want to continue using my photography to communicate global issues that explore the human-environmental connection. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in the future to include youth. And so that's kind of an insight that I've gained from doing this project for future potential projects and stories. So climate change is obviously a very complex global issue with no single solution. And I'm sorry I skipped a slide. Okay. I had several project outputs for my photo project. I developed a new website, LioneClarePhotography.com, where on the Stories and Projects blog, my Vietnam story is featured. I also did 3 presentations at my university. One was at an undergraduate research conference. One was at a climate change symposium, and the other at a senior art night in the Davidson Honors College. And I also have a photo exhibit up currently in the Davidson Honors College. And there is me pictured in front of it. So yeah, back to this. Climate change, complex global issue. Doesn't have a single solution. I think it is unfortunate and disheartening that our current president just pulled us out of the most successful global climate agreement so far. But I don't think we have to necessarily wait for policy. It may not seem that small individual actions like using reusable bags at the grocery store or more energy efficient light bulbs or walking to work instead of driving are making that big of an impact, but collectively I think there's a lot of potential to have a big impact. And I also think it's important that this Vietnam and this story all halfway across the world, but we're here in Alaska and we're experiencing a lot of climate change impacts. People's homes are collapsing because of permafrost melt. There is struggles with subsistence lifestyles due to sea ice melt in the Arctic and species dying off as well. Last year there was, the Mere population was devastated because of changes in their food sources, which are likely linked to rising ocean temperatures. And here in Southeast, we have our yellow cedar trees that are suffering as well. So that's an important connection I've made since going to Vietnam, because that's an area I was really focused on that, but now I'm home in Alaska and I'm realizing that this is similar too, and there's different areas all around the world that now I want to go and do the next photo story. I think it's important to share and make those connections globally. I think with that, I want to take an opportunity to thank a number of people and sponsors who supported me on this trip and project. I was gifted a wide-angle lens from Tamron that I think almost all but one of the photographs in my stories was taken with. The W.A. Franke College of Forestry and Conservation, their Sustainability Fellowship Program, the Mansfield Center, which funds a lot of external study abroad scholarships programs, our student government, ASUM, for a scholarship, the Davidson Honors College for sponsoring my photo exhibit that's there, and especially my faculty mentor, Dr. Nikki Fear, who was our trip leader and is the Climate Change Studies Program Director at my university. With that, I think that's all I have, and I think we can open it up for questions. Again, reminder to use the microphone.
I always get to ask the first question to get people going. At the risk of taking a global issue and making it somewhat local, what sorts of things that you observed in Vietnam did you see happening in Alaska? Like, are salmon streams going to become too brackish? Or something else along those lines? What do you think?
It's hard to really predict because I'm not super into the science of everything, but I have read some things and heard some things about salmon streams, especially potentially suffering because of rising stream temperatures that are linked to lack of snow and runoff, so there's not as much cooling in the rivers, and that has, I think, potential for hurting the salmon runs in the future, which is huge for us here.
Also Nikon or Canon?
Nikon. Who's next?
Go for it.
Thanks a lot. So lots of rice, lots of birds. What type of crane? Is it the one with the fro?
I don't know. Didn't see any cranes.
You didn't see any?
Yeah. Are they normally in the rice fields or?
Well, I think the one that's dominant in that area is the one with the,
Okay, so like crowned crane maybe?
I think
I saw
that's
those in Tanzania, so maybe.
but you didn't notice any.
I didn't see any of Vietnam, no.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Actually, I have one more. How much food storage was there over there? You had a picture of the fish being dried and the shrimp as well. Would those be canned and stored for a long period of time or eaten immediately? And how many people would that feed?
Let's see where that is. There it is. So this was like only a portion of what was actually out there drying. It was like probably almost as wide as this section of stage. I didn't really see that much food storage. The main thing is like in the floating market photo, like that's how a lot of people who live along the rivers get their food. So one family will farm like a certain crop or a certain fruit or vegetable, and they'll travel down the river in their boat to the market, and then there's like everything there from like fruits to vegetables and rice and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of where we visited, they were pretty small farms, and anything that I noticed wasn't, there wasn't a lot of storage. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so it's a very fresh-based kind of a system?
Yeah.
So if the system is impacted, there's not a whole lot of wiggle room in it to absorb something?
I wouldn't think so. The shrimp farmer that we visited, he totally relies on the forest for food, and I think, went out that morning and got catfish for lunch, and his wife prepared it. And I think I remember her saying that in the dry season is the only time they have to go to the market to supplement with some rice and vegetables, I think, so.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh.
Could you just ask her about the floating market?
What about the floating market?
Describe that.
Describe the floating market, if you would, please.
Floating market, yeah. Well, we got up, I think, at like 4 a.m. for it, and it was in Kansas City, which is, like I said, in the center of the Delta. Maybe I'll bring up the map. Yeah, so Kansas is right here, right on like a big exit flow of the Mekong. And yeah, so we woke up at 4 a.m. I think all of the students except one were interested in going. We had to pay a little bit for the boat ride up there, but it was like crazy. There was so many people, so many boats like buzzing around, and everyone was like trying to offer fruit and stuff. And I remember, I have more photos which I would love to show, but they're not part of the story. I think I took thousands. So there's one of a woman on a pretty big boat, like a houseboat, just chopping like dozens of pineapples, and they're just all laid out. And a couple men came up to us with rambutans. I don't know if anyone has ever had those. I've also eaten them on Hawaii, but we just like got a big bushel of those and ate those for like a early breakfast, I guess. But people are yelling, and it's still dark out, and it was a really cool experience. But
Were the customers floating too?
yeah, we came up on little. It wasn't like we had motor boats. But yeah, everyone was in a boat. No, nothing on land.
Is it hard to browse when you're on a boat? I mean, can you kind of casually
yeah,
float
it was
away?
really hard because there's also like it's a tourist attraction as well, and so there's a lot of tourist boats trying to just like weave through there, and like you got to wait your turn if you're like want to go to a certain place to get a certain type of fruit or whatever. And yeah, I would not want to be driving one of those boats, I don't think.
I had a friend in Indonesia once who said if you wanted to cross the road, you had to kind of gesture with your fingers like this, and that it would magically stop traffic. Is there any similar type of thing necessary?
You kind of went like this, but you have to keep it like right as where you're walking because, yeah.
Got it. Cool.
You
Thank
kind of
you.
wait for like an opening and then just go for it. And
Sounds terrifying.
Yeah, it's a little scary. Not too bad.
I have a question. You mentioned that this was part of a minor program at your university in climate studies, and it just, that seems relatively new to me. Can you talk at all about what that program is and what goes into it?
Yeah, sure. So my university, the University of Montana, was actually the first university to develop a program with focus on climate change. So we have it only as a minor program at this point, and I think there's there's 2 other universities maybe now that have developed similar programs. I actually remember when we were there for one night, I think New Year's Eve in Ho Chi Minh City, there was a group from Cornell that this is their first year with the climate change program, and they were kind of going to the same place, and it was fun to talk with them really briefly. But the program is really cool. There's kind of 3 pieces. There's the science of climate change, society, so people part, and then solutions. And so you start with this intro class, which I took my freshman year, like just for the heck of it. I didn't have a minor in my plan yet. And it kind of touches on all of those aspects. And then as you move through, you have to have, 21 credit, you have to have, I think, 6 credits in each of those categories as like a more focused class. So it's pretty like diverse, and I've learned a lot in terms of science, and then the society and social part obviously is what grasped me here in Vietnam. So
thanks for the great overview and pictures. I wondered if you knew anything about government policy related to climate mitigation or support for renewable energy and that sort of thing. Was that part of what you looked at?
So a little bit. It wasn't things like we're a little bit touchy on the government subject, but I do know that those integrated farming systems, like here, this is partially government funded as well. And that the wind farm I'm pretty sure they're partnered with the U.S. with General Electric, supplied the turbines, I believe, and there's a totally government-funded way of getting renewable energy into the national grid and providing that for people. Yeah.
You talked about the migration from rural to urban. What kind of environmental changes did you see because of that?
Like in terms of in the rural areas, or?
Either. Just you said there was a very all this building and there's this migration, especially with the young people. Did you see that affecting the environment?
Well, yeah. So the rural lifestyle, is very just centered on the farm, and that's what you do. You probably walk places, maybe a little bit of motorbikes, but in the city, like everybody has a motorbike, and it's the thing to do is, go out at night as a teenager and ride your motorbike. And I remember with the Delta Youth Alliance trying to kind of, we explained impacts of driving vehicles or motorbikes, whatever, and tried to compare that to just a regular human-powered bicycle. And that was a little bit difficult for them to grasp, like in terms of the science of that and how does that work. But in terms of that way, I'm sure there's a bigger impact. And let's see, what else? I'm not sure about like eating habits. I know that there's a lot more restaurants, and there's like McDonald's and Starbucks, and they're really, really expensive there, and it's a privilege to be able to eat there in a way. But like if there's more people eating at those places, and where those ingredients source from, and how much energy and transportation is required to do that. Yeah, that's what I got on that one. Anybody else?
Thank you for coming. One question I have is sometimes environmental or climate change issues exacerbate social conflicts or conflicts between people. And I'm wondering if that's happening and if any of these means you showed are being used as like peacekeeping or peace building methods for any conflict.
Yeah, interesting, I think. I know that definitely climate change impacts, especially on agriculture. It was obvious, like the farmers we visited it was stressful, and some of them like live in the biosphere reserve that we planted the mangrove trees at. And I'm sure that there's, they kind of have to balance cooperating with the rules of the reserve with their, continuing their livelihoods. And I wasn't there to experience any conflict between that, but that could be a possibility. But also what's really cool, the farmer that has the biogas farm, that was, his was the first and sponsored by Canto University. They're pretty sustainability focused. And he now goes with them and really tries to encourage other farmers to develop those systems. And if I kind of remember the translation correctly, I do remember him talking about how that was pretty frustrating and how a lot of other farmers weren't really interested in grasping that change of lifestyle because they're just used to the way things are, but he's trying to make that appealing to other people and understands the impact that it can have. Yeah.
Thank you for coming and presenting. I was wondering if you observed or learned of any techniques to approach climate change or mitigate climate change that you think could be related to Alaska's approach.
Let's see, well, we don't have much agriculture. A lot of it was agriculturally focused. Let me think. I mean, in terms of like, not necessarily in Vietnam, but in like my college experience, we've learned some about tidal power, which could potentially be an option here, as well as offshore wind, I think. We would have potential to harness those in a pretty good capacity. Let me try to think of anything else. It's definitely like we're so different than Vietnam in terms of food systems, and that was a lot of the focus there. Yeah, if I think of anything else, I'll get back to you.
Also, I was wondering, what are you planning on doing next with this information? Do you have any?
That question a lot lately. I don't really have a plan for after I'm done with school in December yet. I have a few ideas and options. There is a storytelling Fulbright scholarship that I'm interested in and have been told I might have some potential for. And an idea I have for that is kind of maybe doing photo stories similar, but in maybe 3 different regions or 3 different places around the world and comparing those. So maybe I'll go back to the Mekong Delta and then focus on Alaska and somewhere else and show that it's happening all around the world. But I know that I want to keep taking pictures and storytelling and focusing that on any environmental challenges and integrating youth in there as well. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
I think that's it. Thank you very
Okay.
much for coming.
That was Lione Clare in this Juneau World Affairs Council presentation produced in collaboration with 360 North. It was recorded August 24th, 2017 at 360 in Juneau, with support from Alaska Airlines, Alaska Electric Light and Power Company, Alaska Power and Telephone, Coeur Alaska Incorporated, GCI, Tekla Greens Creek Mining Company, Haight and Associates, the Prospector Hotel, Sea Alaska, and Wastman and Associates Incorporated.